Welcome, welcome, and of course, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. And we are going to go into this, and we're finishing up this one chapter and going to start the story of Dina in a moment. So let me finish this up. Just finishing up the chapter that deals with Jacob's meeting with Esau once again. And yesterday we read about how Jacob was able to, in a very diplomatic way, take his leave of Esau. So, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Ir Shechem. So Jacob came whole to the city of Shechem, Asher Be'eretz Canaan, which was in the land of Canaan. So he had come back to the land of Canaan, which of course was the home of his parents. Bevo'o mi Padan Aram, when he came on his way back from Padan Aram, that's in, of course, Babylonia. Vayichan et pnei ha'ir, and he encamped at the, I would say just right outside, literally it means at the face of the city. So he encamped right outside the city. Let's take a look. Is there here? Shalom. So shalom, the word shalom means wholeness. That's the essential idea of shalom from the word shalem, which means whole, complete. So shalem begufo, that he was now healed in his body, whole in his body, shenit rape mitzil ato, because he was healed from his lameness. Of course, remember, he'd been touched by the angel in the hollow of his thigh, and it says he was limping, so he was healed from his limp. And that's from Tractate Shabbat, page 33. Shalem b'mamono, whole in terms of his substance, right? His money. Shelo chaser klum, right? That he was not lacking anything. Mikol oto doron, from that gift. Remember, he gave Esau. He tried to appease Esau with a gift, with a tremendous gift, and he was not lacking anything even after he had given Esau that gift. Shalem b'torato, whole in the Torah he'd acquired, his learning, his spiritual learning, shelo shachach talmudo beveit Lavan, because he did not forget what he had learned, all the Torah learning that he had when he was in the house of Laban. Interesting thoughts there, right? That here he is in the midst of what we can assume was an idolatrous family, and yet it was a place for him to study. Over those 20 years, he had acquired a lot of spiritual understanding, spiritual learning, and he did not forget it. He was still whole in that. And the idea of being whole in body, right? In body, in property, and in soul, right? That's interesting little three things that one can refer to. Ir Shechem, so it says the city of Shechem. So Rashi is looking grammatically at this, right? Because it doesn't say that he arrived at or to the city of Shechem. It just says he arrived the city of Shechem, if we were to translate this literally, right? Kamo le'ir. So he says it's simply a figure of speech of the Bible. There are other examples of this, and it's as if it says le'ir with that pronominal suffix or that saying to the city. Ukamohu, and he gives other examples. In other words, it's not the Torah leaving out a letter or having forgotten a letter. It's an accepted literary form. So in the first chapter of the book of Ruth, it says Ad Bo'ena Beit Lechem. So it says until they came, the two women came to Bethlehem, but there's no Lev Beit Lechem, right? So it doesn't. There's another example. Bevo'or mi Padan Aram, when he came from Padan Aram. Ka'adam ha'omer. So this, he says, it's why it mentions this. It's like a person who says to his lechavero, to his companion, Yatsa ploni mi bein shine arayot uva shalem. What he really was saying was, it was like someone who escaped from the teeth of lions and came whole. So that what Rashi, I think, is picking up here is a literary, reference, that there's a literary point being made here in mentioning the fact that he came from Padan Aram, because we know that he came from Padan Aram, and that it's saying a little bit more than that. It's saying how he escaped, nevertheless, whole. He was able to go through that experience and still come out of it as a whole person. Afkan, and here too, Vayavo Shalem Mipadan Aram. So the fact, it's as if the Torah is sort of saying, it's sort of with an exclamation point, right? And he came whole, right, from Padan Aram, Milavan, from Laban, Ume Esav, and from Esau, right? He had these two basic contenders that he had, or enemies that he had to deal with, and he was able to come out of their clutches. Shenizdavgu lo baderech, who confronted him on his way. He was able to come out. So Rashi's able to pull out for us a certain piquancy, I might call it, right? A little cream from these sentences here to get that subtlety. Vayiken et chelkat hasadeh, and he purchased that portion of the field, asher natasham oholo, where he had pitched his tent, miyad bnei chamor avi Shechem, from the hand, in other words, from the control, right, of the sons of Chamor, the father of Shechem. B'me'ak kasita, with 100 kasitas. And Rashi is going to have to try to explain to us what this is. I mean, we would assume that it's some kind of coin. There is more than that definition. So we're going to take a look at it. Kasita, there he goes, right into it, kasita. Me'ah, he says that it's a coin. There is a coin that's called a me'ah, with an ayin, and there's 6 me'ahs to a dinar. If I'm not mistaken, a dinar is a coin of some value, whether it's I think it may even be a gold piece. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva mentions, Keshehalachti lekarchei hayam, that I went to Karchei Hayam, I think refers to places overseas. A krach is a city, Hayam of the sea. So I don't think it just means a seaside town. I do think he refers to having gone out of Eretz Yisrael and visited some foreign places. I believe that's really the point he's making. In other words, the fact that he had to journey by sea to go to these particular locales. Hayu korim leme'ah, they would refer to a me'ah, what we refer to as a me'ah, they would call it a kasita. So it's simply another name. In this case, we're saying it's another name for a specific coin. The Targumo, however, Rashi adds that if you look at the Targum, at the Aramaic, let's take a look at here, right? He says churfan. So I looked up the word churfan, and in the Jastrow dictionary on page 440b, it refers to lambs, churfan tovin. In other words, excellent quality lambs. Charifin bechol makom, they would pass as easy exchange in any place. Kagon over lasocher. He says this is similar to an expression that was used in Chayei Sarah, where it talks about Abraham purchasing the cave of Machpelah, and it refers to the amount of money he paid over lasocher, meaning it's accepted money anywhere. That this is coinage or at least has the value of being accepted universally. So onwards. Vayetzev sham mizbeach, and he set up there an altar. Vayikralo, and he called it or called him. Lord doesn't define whether it's an it or a him. El Elohei Yisrael. El, the mighty one, the God, Elohei Yisrael, the God of Israel. Complicated sentence. Syntax is a little bit complicated. Rashi's going to pull out quite a bit out of this. Vayikralo, and he called, again, the simple meaning might be that he called this altar El Elohei Yisrael. And that, of course, raises a question mark, right? Why would you call an altar by that name? So, Lo shehamizbeach karui Elohei Yisrael. It's not that he called this altar Elohei Yisrael, the God of Israel. Ela al shem shehaya kadosh baruch hu imo. But he named it, he dedicated it, recognizing how God, how the Holy One, blessed be He, had been with him, v'hetzilo, and had rescued him, had saved him from all the dangers and all the challenges that he'd gone through since he left his home and escaped Esau, and how God had successfully brought him to this particular point, back to the land of Canaan. And so he dedicated this altar with this in mind, right? Recognizing ultimately that his salvation had come from God and that he would not have ever been able to make it had it not been for God's helping him. Kara Shem HaMizbech al Shem HaNes. So he called the name of the altar by the name of the miracle. Lihiyot shivcho shel makom nizkar, so that the praise of God, makom, referring to God, would be remembered, would be associated with Kriyat Hashem, right? That when they referred to this altar, they would think about how God had rescued Jacob from all these dangers. Klomar, that is to say, mi shehu el. That is to say that if we were to sort of pull apart the words here, it says, the one who is God, Mishahu El, the one who is God, Hu HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Holy One, blessed be He, Hu Lelohim Li, He is my Elohim, He is my God. And I've clarified for myself, understood better what that is, and that is recognizing that everything that ultimately happens to you comes through God's kindness and mercy, and to know that these things, and to ultimately accept God's decrees regarding a person. Sheshmi Yisrael, and Elohim, because my name is Yisrael, and there's the El of Yisrael. V'chein matzinu b'Moshe, and we find similarly with regards to an incident involving Moses in Exodus chapter 17, Vayikra Shmo Hashem Nisi, and he called this altar, the Lord is my standard, the one who supports me. That's the idea there. And of course, the word nes, which means miracle, but again, the idea of a miracle of support, the miracle of rescue, the miracle of salvation. Lo shehamizbeach karu Hashem. It's not that he was calling the altar Hashem, that he was calling the altar God, ela al shem hanes, but it was in remembrance and recognition of the miracle, Kara Shem HaMizbeach. That's where he dedicated the altar. He called the name of the altar, Lahaskir, in order to make mention, Shivcho Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, praise of God, the praise of God, Hashem Hu Nisi, of God is, or the Lord is my salvation, my standard, the one who supports me. Now we're going to go in a whole different direction. However, our sages also interpreted this, Shehakadosh Baruch Hu, that the Holy One, blessed be He, in other words, Vayikra Lo isn't on Jacob, but is on God, that God called him, Yaakov El, that he called, that God called Jacob, powerful one, because the word El essentially means ability, the ability to do things, to have that ability, that power. And this is from Tractate Megillah Yod Chet. So, V'divrei Torah, and the words of Torah, kapatish, they're like a hammer, yifotzetz sela, that is able to strike and crack a rock. Mitchalkim, so that when you strike the rock with a hammer, they divide up lakama tamim, to a number of explanations. Vani, however, I, that is Rashi, liyashev pshuto shel mikra bati. I came basically not to give you these kinds of midrashim, but to try and explain the basic meaning of the scriptural text, but never to forget that the scriptural text is capable of going way beyond the straightforward and simple meaning. So he's certainly not denying the validity of the rabbinic interpretation, but he's saying that that is a level of understanding that is beyond the basic meaning of the text. So there was a Torah Tamima on this. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking aloud. And I did take a look at it, and whether or not I think it's worth our time now. So I think I'm just going to keep going, just sort of as we're sort of moving along here. So we are on to the next chapter. Vateitzei Dina bat Leah. So now he's back in the land of Canaan. He has arrived whole, and of course, this is what he was in exile for those 20 years, and now he has returned from his exile. And what happens? He has this incident coming up with Dina. So it's not going to be that he is going to now rest secure and enjoy the rest of his life under his vine and fig tree. He now has, as we see, a series of tsaros, of troubles. So Dina, v'teitzei Dina bat Leah, and Dina, the daughter of Leah, went out. So actually, this Asher Yalda Yaakov, whom she, that is Leah, had born to Jacob, went out. Lirot bivnot haaretz, to see the daughters, literally, of the land. In other words, to check out the girls. She went out to see, to socialize. So, I'll do the Rashi, and then I want to comment a little bit. Bat Leah. So why the mention? I mean, we know this. We had read before that Leah had given birth to Dina. Velo bat Yaakov. In other words, he's saying, the point of the Torah is saying bat Leah as opposed to bat Yaakov. Why? Ela al shem yitziata. The reason is that the Torah is giving a literary allusion to the fact that she liked going out. She liked going out. Nikret bat Leah. And for this reason, that's why she's referred to bat Leah. And there is, I have to think, a certain sense that that there's a value that going out too much is going to cause problems, and you'll see there's actually a term they use, a yatzanit, a person who goes out all the time. So she'af hi yatzanit haita, because her mother was also someone who liked to go out, to leave the domestic place and head on out, right? Bereshit Rabbah. Shene'emar, how do we know this? Vateitzei Leah likrato, because it talks about how Leah went out to meet him, meaning Jacob. She went out and told him that he was to consort with her that night. And this is cute because you're going to hear a proverb that you're quite probably familiar with regarding her. They made a proverb, hamashal, that is the proverb, ke'ima kevita, kemi'ah, like mother, like daughter. So I know you've heard that, I'm pretty sure. So here we have in the Rashi how old that proverb is. Just interesting. So for a long, long time, when I'd read the Bible and I'd read these passages about Dina, I'd say, what has this got to do with the general narrative? How does this fit in to the general narrative and how relevant is it in terms of Jacob's life? And fairly recently, I realized, because for me, it solves a puzzle, which is, why does Joseph accuse his brothers when they come down to Egypt and he recognizes them and they don't recognize him? He says to them, you are spies come to look at the nakedness of the land. And look at how they react. And why does he say that? And my sense is because he knows he's very aware of this incident with Dina. And he's also very aware of what happens here and how the brothers react. And he knows they're not going to forget it either. You don't forget this kind of thing that happened. And so he is able, so this story of Dina actually turns out to explain why he would have said this to them and why they would have reacted the way they did, and how he was able to then, turn things around eventually to test them and to find out if they really cared in the least as to what they'd done in selling their brother into slavery. So this story of Dina turns out to actually be quite essential in terms of understanding the narrative. And as I also have come to understand, the sentence which talks about Jacob seeing Rachel and falling in love with her at the moment, right, is actually also a key hinge as to the story of Joseph and what happens later, because it comes to, in a way, pinpoint the tragedy of Jacob's life, in that in preferring Rachel and falling in love with her. And obviously it says so explicitly how he was in love with Rachel, but he wasn't in love with Leah, is going to set up clearly a situation of jealousy. And so the whole story hinges on these particular incidents, and they turn out to be an integral part of this amazing narrative with which we're going to finish up the book of Genesis. So just a little realization of just how beautifully, beautifully constructed this story is. So, Vayar ota Shechem ben Hamor Hachivi, the sea haaretz, and Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her. Vayikach ota, and he took hold of her. Vayishkav ota, and he lay with her. Vaya'aneha. So this Svarya, that's the reference here, translates it as he disgraced her. But the truth is that is a euphemism. That is a euphemism for the idea of rape. That word is also used when it refers to rape. So Sepharia wasn't comfortable with saying that, but we see how Rashi's going to handle that. But disgraced is not such a bad translation, as you'll see. Vayishkavota, and he lay with her. Kedarcha, that is the rabbinic way of saying normal sexual relations. Vaya'aneha, right? And he disgraced her. Shelo kedarka. That's the way, in other words, not in the normal way, meaning essentially it usually comes to define anal intercourse. So interesting, right? None of this stuff is new. And the idea of so disgraced on that regard could be understood in a way that is a good translation. And this is actually found in the Talmud. And again, this in general is a reflection of the fact that Judaism isn't just about the sweet and nice and, sweetness and light. It tries to just help us understand our lives from every element of our lives. So go do a little bit more. Vatidbak nafsho bedina bat Yaakov, and his soul was attached to Dina, the daughter of Jacob. Vaye'ehav et hana'ara, and he was in love with the maiden. Interesting, by the way, that this says na'ar, and there's no hey at the end of it. And in the Sefer Torah, even though it's to be read as na'ara, the maiden, Vaidaber alev hana'ara, and he spoke encouragingly, right? He spoke to the heart of the maiden. He tried to woo her, essentially, is what we're saying. Alev hana'ara, the heart, regarding the heart of the maiden. Dvarim hamityashvim al halev. In other words, he was saying encouraging words that the heart would appreciate, would find attractive, etc. Example, Re'i okay. Re'i avicha, he says to her, see your father bechalkat sadeh, for he bought a little portion of a field, a small portion of a field, ktana, small, kama mamon bizbez, he says, and look at how much money he had to spend to buy that little part of the field, which of course is a way of understanding why it has to mention the amount of money that Jacob paid for that field. Ni asiacha, I will marry you, vatikne ha'ir v'chol sadoteha, and he can buy the entire city and all its accompanying fields. So in other words, I will bring you great wealth if you're willing to marry me. And that's how he was trying to woo Dina. And we'll stop here and continue tomorrow. Continuing here with verse 4. So give me a moment and I'll mark the place. Any comments, any questions?
Yeah.
Go. Yes.
This is all very weird stuff, but it's all in my head, so I'm going to say it.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So one thing is, and these two things may be connected, but it says Leah and Dina like to go out.
Yes.
And earlier it had established that Esau liked to go out and Jacob liked to stay
Yes.
at home.
Intense, right.
So that's one thing. The other thing is with the use of the word na'ar and talking about possibly anal sex as opposed to a normal way that a man would lie with a woman.
Yes.
And wondering about that connection and whether those two things that I just mentioned have any connection.
So I'm not sure exactly the point you're trying to make here.
I'm not making a point. I'm pointing out some things that are correlated, seem to be like connected thematically, but I don't understand a connection, but there is definitely a parallel between the going out versus the staying in.
Yes,
There's
you're right.
definitely, in my mind, and even though these are two maybe different midrashic sources, but there's the parallel between the Ketiv Na'ar and the midrash of it being a weird kind of sex. So those things are, and I don't know if there's a connection between the going out thing and the laying down thing. And I don't know if those connections that I'm pointing out have any relevance to any of the rabbis who've been studying connections, but I can't help but make them in my mind.
Okay, so I'm going to try and see if I can pull some strands together as I understand. So Na'ar, of course, is masculine. Na'ara is feminine. Is it saying that the fact that she went out like she did was more like a Na'ar than a Na'ara? Is that a suggestion there? I mean, I really appreciate this conversation because, you know, you're forcing me to sort of give some other thoughts to this. The idea of so the idea also of him having, you know, sex with her is the idea of him using her. In other words, the idea of his simply wanting to take pleasure in his relationship with her, and then it's saying, you know, he was infatuated with her and wanted to marry her, but was his reason for wanting to marry her is because he wanted the pleasure that he was getting out of his physical encounter with her. So, I mean, I think the Torah, without any question, we know that in Judaism, sexual relations are not something that are frowned on if they're done with the right intentions and under the right circumstances, that it's part of a whole human being, okay? But it has to be done in a way that's respectful, etc., etc.
I'll remind you in an hour.
Okay, I don't know whose Siri that is, but I don't think it's
Harlan's.
Rabbi, I think that Dana went out because she had all brothers. She had all brothers, and she wanted to get with women. She wanted to be with women. So what happened is she went out, and there were aliens, and she should have stayed home to be protected. But no, she went out. She wanted to be with women because she had all brothers. And what happened is that when she went out, who met her? The king's son. He's a governor, but I think he's a king also. He met the son met her and had the intercourse with her, and it was wrong. And the family, Simon, Levi, and all the other brothers didn't like it at all.
Okay, careful, Harlan. Dun.
Don't give it away. Don't give it away.
Please
Jumping
stop.
ahead.
Explain the story.
You're still recording.
Yes, I
by the
am.
way.
Yes, I am.
The king's trying to help his son, and so he
Yes,
said,
okay,
well, listen,
so we're gonna, Harlan,
all bridesmaids,
Harlan, let me stop you if I may, please. We are going to get to that part of the story, okay? And I'm happy for you to
For another
hear,
day.
but okay, so I'm going to stop the recording.
He was wrong, absolutely wrong. And I praise Simon and Levi, what they did.
Okay. All right, so that's coming up, okay? I'm going to stop the recording at this point.